Hello, and welcome to Gilded Loop. My name is Matt, and welcome to part 2 in our series of 1 square 5 ways. So in the first video in our series, we made this, which is our C2C granny clusters. In part 2, which is what we're going to be doing today, we're going to be going over a standard granny square in the round. So this is an ideal video for any beginner who wants to know just how to do a regular granny square, but wants to be able to transition between colors. So we are working on 5 colors. These are all done with Caron Simply Soft, and we're using all of the same colors for all of these videos. So we're using soft pink, red, burgundy, country blue, and dark country blue. Part 2, which is today, is your standard granny square. Part 3, which will be coming up next, is this lovely guy, which is a dropped granny. And it creates more of a solid pattern. Part 4 is going to be this C2C mosaic square. And the last part will be your standard granny mosaic. So if you are looking for any of these squares, now you know which video to look out for. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started on our standard granny square. Now this granny square is, let's measure, 8.5 inches, which 8.5 by 8.5, which I'm pretty sure is exactly the same measurements as the C2C that we were working on. So set this off to the side. We're going to be using a 4.5 millimeter hook. Caron Simply Soft recommends a 5 millimeter hook. However, if you want your spaces in between to not have as big of a gap, which I prefer, use a 4.5, and it still has decent drape. Okay. So now there are 2 different methods for starting, and I will show you both. Okay. So first method is going to be your magic knot. Now, for magic knot or a magic loop, you're going to wrap the yarn around your fingers twice. Okay, you're just going to go ahead and pull that up through, and using this, you're going to pull up, and you're going to chain 3. Oops. Okay. Now, the reason why this is called a magic circle is because you can retighten it. Okay. Now, so we chained 3 on our magic circle, and for your center, you're going to be making 3 clusters, or 4 clusters rather, I'm sorry. So we're going to come back through, we're going to double crochet into the circle here. 1, 2. Okay, and then that is 1 cluster, and you can simply go around and around and around, and then when you're all done, you can pull this too, like that. Okay, and then that will close up your circle, and you have to weave in this end. So that is your magic ring. I do not prefer that method because I like to do my chain 4s. So I'm going to go ahead and just make a slip knot here. You make a slip knot any way that you like. Now, the reason that I like this chain 4 is 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'm just going to go back in and slip stitch into the very first stitch here, and then chain 3. The reason why I like the chain 4 is because on the magic circle, it goes out and goes in and goes out and goes in, and you have to tie it off and you have to weave it in, and I think that there's just too many variables for it to expand or contract over time, especially with multiple washes, and if the end that you wove in comes out or anything like that. I know that there's special ways for people to go about making sure that that doesn't happen, but with the chain 4, you're not going to have to worry about that. So I stick to good old faithful. So what I'm going to do is I'm making my granny cluster. So again, we're going to have 4. So I'm just going into the very center of this, and what you're noticing is I have my end here, and I'm going to be working over that end as much as possible to get rid of it. So I'm making a double crochet. You can see how this yarn splits a little bit here. So I have 1 loop, 2 loops, and do another double crochet into the center of that ring. So here's my first cluster of 3. Okay, so we have our first granny cluster, which is of 3. Now, what you need to think about is that you're making your corners here so you can have a square, right? So on my corners, I chain 2. Some people chain 3. I don't like the look of a chain 3. I have always chained 2. And it works out really well for me, and I don't end up getting a wonky center. I think when you chain 3, it's much easier to get a skew or wonky center. What I mean by that is where this is like a skew and everything else is a square. It just doesn't look that great. So I chain 2, and then I'm going to do another granny cluster. So that's 3 double crochets. 1, 2, 3. And as I'm going into my center, I can continue to work over this tail here to try to eliminate it as much as possible, less to weave in. Chain 2. Okay. I'm going to do 3 more double crochets into the center here. 1, 2. This tail keeps on trying to come loose. 3. Okay, so now I have 3, and I'm just going to pull this to give myself a little bit more open space here. I'm making my corner here, so I'm going to chain 2, 1, 2. Okay, and then I'm going to do my last cluster for this round. So 3 double crochets all into the center there. 1, 2. And the tail's getting fussy. And 3. Okay. So first cluster, second cluster, third cluster, fourth cluster. We've chained 2 in between each. For this last one, I'm going to chain 1. So I'm not chaining 2 here, and I am going to join at the top of this first, where we started this first cluster. This yarn splits a little bit, so I just gotta kind of finagle my way in there. And I'm gonna slip on through. Now the reason why I only chained 1 and not 2 is because when all is said and done, it's gonna react the same way as a chain 2, because you're slip stitching in. So you still have another stitch. So it functions all the same way. So I'm in my corner here. I'm gonna chain 3. Okay. Now, every round you're going to turn your work. This is the secret to making sure that it does not get askew or twist up on you. Okay? So I turned my work. I'm going to make my granny cluster here. So I'm going to go into my chain space here. And I'm making 2, 3. So I have my 3 double crochets. That is a granny cluster. Now I'm going to pull this to the side because this is going to function as my corner here. I'm going to chain 2 because I'm making this corner here. And then I'm going to go back in and I'm going to double crochet 3 into this same stitch that I was just in. 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so now you can see here I've made my corner. I have a granny cluster here, and again, a granny cluster is just 3 double crochets into that same stitch. So I have my granny cluster, chain 2, another granny cluster. That has formed the corner of this second row. Okay, now, some people chain 1 space in between the granny clusters from this second row on. I don't. I think it creates too much of an open space in between, so I prefer just to go right next to each other. So what I mean by that is I'm going to yarn over, I'm going to go in here, and you'll see this as we go even further. So right now I'm just making a granny cluster. I'm just in my second row here. I'm going to chain 2 because now I'm in a corner. I'll make another granny cluster into the same stitch that I was just working in. 1. Oh, there it goes splitting on me. 2, 3. So, corner, and we have another corner that we just made here. So we're going to be coming back over into this corner and doing the same thing. So let's double crochet 3, chain 2 for our corner, and double crochet back into this same space 3 more. Make another granny cluster. Now you can take this a step further and make a continuous granny square where you just continue going on and on and on and on until it gets to the size that you so desire. Or you can make the bunch of squares like I'm doing and connect them all together. So let's do this last corner here. 1, 2. I have a friend who just exclusively does continuous granny squares. They're easy, and they like it. As you all know, I do some granny square projects, and then I do some full blankets. I like kind of the mix. I actually like to work on granny squares in the summertime, because then you don't have a big hot blanket on your lap. All right, so I did my last corner. Here, how we're going to join is we're just going to slip stitch this through. So I'm going in the top of this first stitch here of this granny cluster. I'm not yarning over, I'm just slip stitching. So I'm going to slip, and boom, there we go. All right, you can see my tail there, but all right, so let's take a look here at our sample. So we have 1 row, 2 rows. That's it. 2 rows. So in the C to C, we had 3 of each, but we're just doing 2 of each here. Okay? Just makes it a little bit easier. So we're done with the light pink. It's time for us to move to the red. So I'm going to show you how to transition the color to the red. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to just clip and leave ourselves just a small tail. And we're going to bring in our red. You don't have to tie it off. It can just be kind of dangling there. And I'm going to pull it on through and just tighten this up. Okay? And I'm going to do the same thing that I did last time, which is I'm taking both strands in and I'm pulling them through my first stitch, which essentially locks it into place. I can pull this back down. I'm going to let this tail go down and just kind of pull this snugly all too. Okay. What I like to do on this too is just tie this off a little bit. It makes it to where it's not going to try to run away from me, and I can still tie in my ends later. And I'm just going to do a double knot here. People have different thoughts about this. Some people just like to tie in the ends. I just do a little double knot there. Yes, it does create a small little bump, but it's really not noticeable when the whole project is done and you've tied in these ends. So that counted as a chain 1 right there. So we're going to chain 2, chain 3. So we have a total of 3 going up. So now we've started our next row. We have to turn our work though. So we're going to turn. Just going to tuck this tail on over like this. And I'm going to do 2 more double crochets here. That's going to count. Now, when you weave in this end, this is going to make this look all fine, I promise. It will not look askew or anything like that. It's all in how you weave in your ends. Now, there are many methods to joining colors, and I prefer this method, but I will show you one other method when we change colors the next time. So again, we're just kind of going into our corner space here now, and we're going to make our corner. Okay, 1, 2, and 3. Chain 2. Come back into that same space, do 3 more double crochets. Oop. Okay, so we have our corner, we have this cluster. Coming back into this middle cluster here. Every time that there's an open space, you're going to be working into it. So we're just making a granny cluster, 3 double crochets. That makes a granny cluster. Coming in to work this corner here. 2, 3, chain 2, into that same space, another granny cluster, 2, 3. So when it comes to changing colors, or even chain 4, the magic circle to start, it's just your preference and whatever you think works easiest for you. Everyone's going to have a method where they say this is the definitive way, this is how you have to do it. But you work and you do how it makes you comfortable, because when you are comfortable, you are going to be more confident about your work, and it's going to enable you to work a little bit faster as well. So whatever makes you comfortable. That's the great thing about crochet. There is no right or wrong. You can have your project be customized a little bit more to you. I think that's why I like crochet a little bit more. I've tried knitting before. There's definite rights and wrongs to knitting. I don't know, my brain just doesn't compute the knitting well. I commend anyone who can do that really well, because I don't know, my brain functions with crochet really well, but when it comes to knitting, it's like I'm looking at trigonometry in front of me. 2, 3. Okay, now I'm going to come back through, and I'm going to slip stitch into the top of this first one here. Oops. Okay, there we go. So that's our first round of the red done. So let's go ahead and do one more round. So we're going to chain 3, turn our work, and doing 2 more. We're going to be working this corner here. 2, 3, chain 2 for a corner, okay, granny cluster, now when it comes to using inline hooks, pardon me, tapered hooks like this clover hook, clover I highly recommend because they have like this coating on the shaft there that just makes it glide and move so easy. Inline hooks, I prefer Susan Bates, but if I'm going to use a tapered hook, it's got to be clover, just because just glides like butter. Okay, I did my corner there. Coming around here to make this cluster. Again, as soon as we finish the red, I'm going to show you a different method when we move to burgundy. And then you can use whichever one resonates with you the most. I switch it up. I don't always do it the same. So it's nice to know the different methods of doing things. That way, if one works easier for you, you can do that. I like to be a little bit different and not always do things the same way twice. Oops, here we are. Coming around. Okay, we're going to do this corner. Oh, see what just happened? I pulled up some of the yarn that was from below. It just happens with this Simply Soft. So you just have to be careful. You might have to pull out a stitch to unfurl that or undo that. Okay. But the Simply Soft has just such a nice, soft project at the end. In my opinion, it makes fantastic baby blankets. What is Simply Soft? Is it acrylic or polyester? It is acrylic, 100%. That's what I thought. Okay. Last granny stitch of this row before we change colors. Boom. All right, now is where we would need to change our colors. Okay, so what I'm going to show you now is let's go ahead and use this other method. So I'm going to clip off my yarn. Let me go ahead and pull in the burgundy. Okay, so what you are essentially doing with this method is you are going to pull in the burgundy. So what you're going to do is you're going to put your hook in the top of your stitch that you would be slip stitching into, which is right here. Then I'm going to go ahead and hold this tight with my other finger. I'm going to pull the burgundy on through. Okay, and then I'm going to just tighten this up just a smidge. And then I'm going to lock this in. I can drop my end here. And then now I have my chain 3. This makes it to where you don't have to tie it off or anything like that. That is another way to change your yarn color. Again, I kind of use a little bit of both, but I'm going to go ahead and turn my work. Okay. I just have to make sure that we're tight here, so I'm going to hold that down just while I do this stitch. And I'm coming back through. I'm going to do my first granny cluster of this row here. Boom. I'm going to move on to the next one. Now you are going to have to tie in all these ends. Every time you change a color, you're going to have more to tie in. So that's why sometimes these granny squares do take a little bit of time, because you're going to be tying in some ends. However, the way that they look when you finish and have used multiple colors just cannot be beat. It looks great. 4 to 5 colors looks phenomenal on a standard granny square like this. Now, if you're going with a design, I like to go to like a 2-color layout with a lot of the different types of squares. I do like a sunburst pattern or something like that. So again, I'm just kind of going across in the same way I was just showing you in the previous row. I'm making a granny cluster in between each stitch. Okay, and then I'm coming in my corner here, granny cluster, just my 3 double crochets, chain 2, and then my 3 double crochets here. All right, now what we're going to work on is we're going to continue to go around. Again, we're doing the burgundy. We're doing 2 rounds of burgundy, 2 rounds of country blue, and 2 rounds of dark country blue. Why don't you work on a couple of these colors and I'll meet you back towards the end. Okay, so now that you've finished all of your colors, what we're going to need to do is work on weaving in our ends. But first, you can kind of see what these are going to look like when they're put together. Of course, you would seam these together, but here's what it looks like, and you can get a general idea. I think it looks really nice. So what you're going to need is you're going to need a darning needle, just like this one, to work on weaving in your ends, and I'm just going to demonstrate how you would do that. So first, you're going to take your yarn, and you're going to fold it like this, and then you're just going to put it through the eye of that needle and pull on through, and there you go. Next, we're going to work on just kind of putting this through the fibers here. So you're going to be weaving in and out. This is a very soft yarn, this Karen Simply Soft. And so if you don't try to break through some of these fibers like I'm doing right now, it's going to fall out or it's going to wiggle free over time. So you really want to, as you're putting this needle on through, make sure that you're kind of breaking through those fibers, and you don't have to go crazy. You're just going to be going through a few and go ahead and pull that through just like I'm doing right here. So it doesn't have to be a huge length. And then what you're going to do is you're going to come back in the exact reverse, okay? So just not a terribly long spot, but you're just going to come back through a little bit here, continuing to break through those fibers, and then just pull it all on through. And there you go. You can release it from your needle and just clip off your yarn, and that's not going anywhere. That's going to stay right where it's at. And you're going to continue to do that for any of the other ends that you would need to weave in. So you're going to see here that most of my ends are all kind of in the same spot as I attached the new color and all kind of the same area. So I do have a couple ends that I'm going to need to weave in here, but there we go. That's kind of what we've got going on here for this standard granny square. I think it looks great once all these ends are all woven in. You can go ahead and put this together and start making your project. I hope you got something out of this tutorial today. And I want to thank you so much for tuning in. Remember that this is part 2 as part of our 5-part series. So we are going to have, this is going to be our next one, the part 3. And then parts 4 and parts 5 are these mosaic, the C to C and your standard granny mosaic. So again, thank you for tuning in. Make sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, engage in any way you can is very helpful. And thank you so much. We'll see y'all soon. Thanks. Bye.